so our first step is going to be to remove the battery. So we have an 8mm ratcheting wrench here, or you can use the socket. So we're going to remove this one here for the negative side. Remove that out of the way. Then we're going to come over to the driver's side, and we went ahead and broke that loose. So now we can remove this terminal. Move it out of the way. After that, there's a 15mm nut we have to take off for the top motor mount bolt. And so I'm using a 15mm ratcheting wrench here. Once again, these aftermarket headers are getting in the way, because usually you can just get a ratcheting wrench with an extension straight down on that, but with these in the way I had to use this. But anyway, we're going to remove the top 15mm nut on each side for the motor mounts. Okay, next we lifted the car up into the air, and so we supported it on jack stands right here on the support beam. That's where we lifted with the jack. And so we have our jack stands on each side there, and that's going to be giving us enough space to work up in the front. Now for the engine support bar, I really like using the alternator holes to lift on to really support the engine. It's a good spot. So we're going to remove the alternator. So we have to get the tension off the belt. So we put our 1/2" drive wrench in here. A breaker bar works better if you can fit one at that particular angle, but it's nice to ratchet too. And you're just going to push down on this, which is going to release tension on the belt. So on one of these smooth pulleys, just pull the belt out from under it, and that way we can get it off of the top of the alternator. Okay, now we're going to remove the 2 lower alternator bolts here. Next, you want to unplug the alternator connector here. So you just put a screwdriver in there and press inward, and then you'll pull the plug right off. So just apply pressure there and you can pull it right out. Now you can lift the alternator forward and get to the connector that's on the back. Okay, now you're just going to remove this boot here to expose this 10mm nut. So you take that off. And now you can lift this. We're just lifting this off of the post. Okay, you can put the nut back on there so it doesn't get lost. And now just lift the alternator out. Okay, so we have our engine support bar in place. We have the feet over here in the fender well, and that's on each side. Then we have our handle here. We're grabbing our chains, and they're both going through the alternator holes there. So we had other alternator bolts. You could probably use your stock hardware, but I like these because they had longer threads. So this bolt is going all the way in to where the alternator mounts on both sides here. So now we can support the engine this way, and as we lift up on the bottom of the engine on the oil pan, this will support the engine from above. On these chains, you do want to make sure that you have the same amount of links going down on both sides so that it will lift evenly. Okay, now from underneath the car, we're going to get these power steering lines out of the way, and there might be a sway bar that's missing on this car that you'd have to disconnect as well. So I just took out the 8mm bolt there, put it back in its place when I was done for that bracket. Now I'm removing this one over here so it comes down from the top. I'm going to remove that one, and then we should be able to push these lines out of our way. Okay, so we've put a block of wood on our jack, and we're lifting on the very front of the oil pan. Okay, the wood's going to help distribute the load so you don't dent your oil pan. And so as we're lifting here, you can see the engine start to raise. Okay, so as it raises, we're going to support it and just keep bringing this, tightening this to increase the tension on that. And that way we're going to be able to support the engine and lift it off of the motor mounts. Okay, so I'm going to let the jack do the heavy lifting. So as these start as these start to get loose from lifting with the jack, then I'm going to come up here and spin this to tighten it down. It's probably not a good idea to crank this in order to lift the engine. So let the jack do the heavy lifting, get that pushed up, tighten this back down to put the tension back on the chains, and just keep doing that process till you have enough clearance. Okay, and so we want to lift until the stud that's coming out of basically the frame of the car clears that motor mount. Okay, next we're going to drain the oil here. So we got our catch pan, and this was a 16 millimeter on this one, so I don't know if that's been changed, but 16. We go ahead and just drain the oil so we can change the oil pan gasket. Okay, then we're just going to go around and remove all of these bolts that go around the entire oil pan. With the engine supported, we have that extra clearance in here so we can drop the pan and get it out. So it's going to be pretty simple. Just go around and take all those out, and we'll put the drain plug back in here in a second. But and it doesn't have to be completely drained. We just don't want it to spill on us when we tip the oil pan around. Okay, and these are all 13 millimeter. Okay, there is a plug on the side of the oil pan, and so you're going to just push on this back side and it will slide right off. Okay, so go around and get all those. Don't forget the two that are hiding up in here at the very back of the oil pan, and just get those all out, and then we'll gently pry it off. Okay, so we dropped the pan down, and we're just shy of not being able to get it out, but it's okay. We can just leave the pan here, and now we can at least get the gasket off. So we're just gonna kind of just come in here and peel it off and slide it out. Okay, so we slid the gasket out. Now keep in mind, up in here there is an oil pickup tube that goes down. See that right in the middle? And so you have to make sure the gasket goes under that in order to get it out. Now it's very important when you go through here, before you put the new gasket on, you want to completely clean this mating surface. So I have some Scotch pad here, and I'm just going along and very gently just sanding this back down. And as you can see, it's really gunky where it used to be, and it's really nice and clean where I've already gone through here. So it's kind of time consuming, but you want to make sure you go around the whole thing and get it nice and smooth. And you want to do that on the oil pan side as well, but just don't take the paint off of this, because then it starts to chip, and then you'll have to take off all of the paint. So just make sure it's smooth on this side, but for the aluminum here, we're just going through and making it nice and clean. Do not drop any of this down into the pan, and obviously you don't want any gunk to get into the pan either. Okay, so I've gone around completely around the entire oil pan, and it is nice and smooth and clean, and it's clean on the top part here too. Can't really see it, but that's clean. So we're ready to put our new gasket on and seal it back up. Okay, so you just want to line up the old gasket over the other one to make sure everything is the same. You'll notice it has the tabs that point downward. That goes down onto the oil pan, and then the rest of it's just pretty flush. So you do have some alignment tabs that'll help you kind of get it in place on the front. But we're just going to line it up. And so remember, we got to snake it down underneath that oil pickup tube and then up in. Okay, here's a little tip. We came in here on the driver's side and slid it in that way. That seemed to be the easiest way to slide it in, and we just got it underneath that oil pickup tube. And so now we're here in place, ready to lift the oil pan back up, line everything up, and tighten it back down. But it really helped coming from the driver's side of the pan and then sliding it in. Okay, so as you go around and put these bolts back in, you want them all to pretty much be in before you tighten any of them down. And then when you go to tighten them down, you want to go from the inside of the pan and then work your way outwards. Okay, and as you can see, we're not lining up over here on the motor mount just because the engine's floating in the air from the top support. So we're gonna have to guide that into its spot. Now I'm just gonna line it back up on this side and line it back up on that side and lower the engine. Okay, so now we're gonna slowly let the engine down, and we want it to line up into those studs for the motor mounts. So we are going to have to kind of rock the engine towards the driver's side is what we're seeing right now, and you want those to line up, and just drop it down until it goes in. Okay, so we got it to line up on the motor mounts there, and so they're back in with the 15mm nut back on top, both sides. Had my neighbor come over, and with a pry bar we just got in there and kind of moved it around. We did find out that the actual stud itself you can kind of pry on, and it will move a little bit, and that was what we were able to do to kind of get it into those holes and just kind of pry it into its spot, and then we just slowly let it down. So hopefully that doesn't give